You are listening to the Stave Off Podcast, the podcast that gives you the information you need to stave off illness and injuries, letting you live a happy life. And now your hosts, Nick and Christina.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Stave Off Podcast. I am one of your hosts, Christina Novak, and I am again here with my co-host, Nick Previtt. Say hi, Nick.
Hey, everyone. How's it going?
We are currently in the middle of a winter wonderland. It is absolutely gorgeous because it's a Sunday and we get to stay inside and just get to watch the snow from the outside. But I am terrified about this commute tomorrow morning because we have a 6:30 class, which means that we're at the clinic and at the gym for 6.
Yep, 6.
But with 25 centimeters of snow, I think we're being a little ambitious thinking that we're going to get there on time, but we will try, definitely.
We got stuck by a couple of plows once or twice before.
Yeah, that took us
Not the funnest thing
I know, we were going, I know, I was freaking out. Plus, I was hungry.
She got hangry, started yelling at people on the road.
No, I wasn't like aggressively yelling, but there were some snarky comments that came out of my mouth at 5:45 a.m.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so today we're going to talk a little bit about stress, what is normal stress, how the stress system works, and why, even me as a physical therapist, why that's super important for me to know kind of a baseline stress level of the people that are coming to see me in the clinic.
And I think everyone talks about stress in such a negative light, that stress is also a positive thing in the right kind of environment. So I just want to get that out of the way first before we kind of bash on stressful environments.
Yeah. And so I looked up the definition, and through CAMH, the Canadian Association of Mental Health, I think is the Center for Addictions and Mental Health. Sorry, I got the wrong acronym. They kind of talked about stress as a response to environmental pressures or demands. And they said that, it's a normal response to situations where we perceive a threat or danger. And really, how often now do we have a true threat?
I think you can perceive threat as a couple of different things. You can think of a threat to your lifestyle, or not your person per se, as in physical harm or danger.
Yeah, that's what I mean, though.
A threat to how you live. If you lose your job, you probably can't go on as many trips as you want to go.
Or let's just talk about rent if you lose your job.
Exactly.
And so I guess that's where we're starting to see some of the differences in how we're perceiving stress and what's happening with our system. Because our stress responses, they were put into place, or they were essentially designed through evolution to help us run away from things that were trying to eat us, or bears that were trying to kill us, and all that type of thing. That's really what stress was.
Yep. No, completely. So it's definitely changed in terms of how we perceive stress.
And
I don't
what
get
our stresses are.
Too much about a bear trying to attack me.
Yeah.
You probably do more than I do.
Well, if we were camping, I would. And so there's an amazing book called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. And the last edition was published in 2004. So it's a little bit older now, but it was from a researcher named Robert Sapolsky. And he talks about this, about how the reason why we're seeing all of these issues around stress is because from an evolution's perspective, stress was a snapshot in time. It was something that, we would be walking in wherever habitat or environment that we were, and something would happen that would cause a stress response. But now, because of, what Nick was talking about with our perceived stress, and stressed from emotional and mental things rather than physical stuff, our stress can be all the time.
Yep. Yeah, it's true. The evolution of humans has kind of gotten pretty stagnant with homes being more advanced and medical professions and things people would have died of.
Yeah.
And then not passed on their genes for susceptibility to that specific thing that killed them isn't happening anymore.
Yeah.
So we're getting a lot, from an evolutionary standpoint, humans aren't really, theory of Darwinism doesn't really apply to us anymore.
Really, we are the superior thing when it comes to Darwinism. Well, that's true. And I think that not only are those variations, so what Nick's kind of talking about too is from an evolutionary perspective, people who in general didn't handle stress well, essentially wouldn't survive. But now, because of medical advances and things like that, people who have those issues are now living and thriving. But I also think that the big thing is our culture now. And so now the reason why we have this chronic stress response is because we're in this like 24/7 culture. And I totally understand it. Like we're small business owners. Like 24/7 is pretty much the name of the game.
There's that, and I think there's the since the world's more local now than it used to be.
Like it's
you see a lot of
feels.
like you were saying, like a zebra doesn't get an ulcer because it doesn't think about what its purpose is in its world. It just exists.
Yeah.
So it doesn't worry about, am I doing
thinking.
this enough or is that happening? So I think that has been a shift recently.
Like the social media stuff, you mean?
Yeah, because now the world's more acceptable, or not acceptable,
accessible.
Accessible, yeah. One of those two words.
One of those
more
things.
accessible, so you only ever see the best of what people put out. You don't get to see the worst. So I think that's changed our perception of ourselves too, because I like that. Not that zebra doesn't get an ulcer because it doesn't think about what it is.
Yeah, so our higher order thinking and things like that, and that kind of goes into the mental health realm. Okay, so the way that I thought we would kind of break this down a little bit is that we would talk about the stress response, what it is, how our bodies perceive stress, and then why it matters that we're in stress all the time.
Yep. Well, our body doesn't perceive, a bear or the loss of our job any differently.
Yeah, exactly. Because the way that our body is wired, our nervous system responds to stress the exact same way. Mm-hmm. And the way that we do that, so if we look, our stress response is related to our nervous system. And we kind of have two ways to break up that nervous system. So we have our central nervous system, which is our brain and our spinal cord. And that's a lot of our processes that control how we move and what we do.
You'll hear a lot of people call this the CNS. That's just abbreviated for central nervous system.
Yep, it's abbreviated. So that's where all of our, voluntary control over things is. I want to say controlled again, but now I'm saying the same word twice in a sentence. But you know what I mean.
If you want to move your arm, that's where this kind of happens.
Yeah, there's a connection from your brain to your muscle, and that's in your central nervous system or your CNS. So our other... Yep. So, but that widely is our autonomic nervous system. Yes. So we have our central nervous system, which is a lot of voluntary control. Mm-hmm. And then our autonomic nervous system, which, as Nick said, is our sympathetic and our parasympathetic system. And our autonomic, you got to think like automatic. It's things that we don't voluntarily or we don't have to think about doing. Yep. Our bodies automatically respond to them.
So as this applies to stress, so say we're in what's called a fight or flight mode. Mm-hmm. Our body responds very similar in both ways. So our autonomic system will secrete adrenaline. It will dilate our blood vessels so we can push more blood and more oxygen through our body so we can use our muscles better. We can push through. We can run faster.
Yeah. But let's break down what those are first. Okay. He's getting ahead of me.
Getting really excited.
He's getting really excited about talking about this. Okay, so exactly what Nick said. So the first part of our autonomic nervous system, or one of the parts, is our sympathetic nervous system. And the way that we think about it is our fight or flight. And he was talking about how all of these things happen in our body, and that's when we're stressed. You have to think that this is when we are hyper alert, and our body is just focusing on how can we escape from whatever is causing us that stress. And so it shuts down anything that isn't required for survival.
There's some pretty cool stuff that goes on. I gotta say, Your pupils will dilate so you can take in more light so you can see better around you. What else happens? Like I said, your veins and arteries will dilate so you can push more. In certain areas.
To the muscles so that we can move the muscles faster.
Exactly.
But it'll decrease the vessels in the blood supply going to things like our gut because it's not going to worry about digesting our lunch when there's a bear that's like going after us. It's the same with like how like our bowel and bladder, like we aren't thinking about going to the bathroom when all of a sudden we have a bear or something that's chasing after us.
There's a couple things that we'll do in terms of pain tolerance too. So if you've ever gotten hurt, say you're playing hockey or you're playing football or anything really, and you get hurt. And so you go off the sidelines and you kind of come down and you notice, oh, I cut my arm. That is a process of the sympathetic nervous system because it secretes some hormones that really
like kind of drive in what we're going to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then kind of ignore the things that are going to slow us down. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's where also some people, if they have like, they talk about those big feats of strength too, where people are really stressed out or there's a high stress accident and they lift cars and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So that is our fast acting system. The other system is our parasympathetic system. And that is our rest and digest system. Basically, that is when recovery takes place. That it can be recovery from anything. It can be mental recovery. It can be we're in a parasympathetic state when we're sleeping, when we're digesting our food. And that is when it kind of opposes the sympathetic system because it's saying, okay, we're safe. We don't have anything going wrong right now. And so we can start getting our body fine-tuned so we can start to recover. We can digest our food. We can take in those nutrients. We can recover those muscles that we broke down when we were exercising, all those type of things.
So there's a lot that's come out about recovery and the parasympathetic nervous system because it does. It brings your body down. You come back into a state of recovery so your the nutrients you get from your food are absorbed a little bit more readily. They're digested better, so your muscles absorb those, and everything just kind of flows a little bit better and more as it's supposed to. So in terms of some people who are either if they're exercising or if they have a fall or they have an injury, if their stress level is very high, they don't recover from that well. Or if they get sick, like we had a friend of ours got a cold. He couldn't seem to kick it for about a week. And I got a very similar cold, and I noticed I didn't kick it for about a week, but I didn't feel as sick as he did. And I completely think that's just due to stress level and how you kind of deal with that on the weekends, things like that.
Yep. So I think that is super important for me as a physical therapist. I always ask people about their stress level because if they aren't recovering well from an injury, and obviously that can have a lot of things that are affecting it, but one of the things can be, if you're going through a really stressful time at work or you're going through some family stuff on top of being injured, that can be a really high stress time in your life and it can actually affect your recovery. Okay, but we're going a little bit too far. Okay, going back to the stress response. So we have our parasympathetic and our sympathetic system. These are kind of nerve connections, but they're also based on the release of hormones. And so the sympathetic system in particular has 3 hormones that are related to it. And they're pretty common. We have the adrenaline, norepinephrine, which they kind of work together and do very similar things, but just act in different areas, and cortisol. And these are the 3 hormones that have kind of come up with this term adrenal fatigue. And it's kind of one of those I want to say it's a new buzzword.
Fancy.
Yeah. And not that it isn't real. I'm not saying that, but I think that we really don't understand what causes adrenal fatigue. Often we think that people are in adrenal fatigue when they aren't, and it's something else. Mm-hmm. And I think that it's something that's going to be more researched, and we still need to learn a lot about it before we can make some definitive conclusions about adrenal fatigue.
I think it's something new that's very similar to something like gluten sensitivity, where it's a new thing that's come up in the last 5 years. It's not super well understood, so everyone just wants to apply it to something because it's easy.
Or the umbrella term.
Yeah, it's a very easy thing. Well, you're adrenally fatigued, you're gluten sensitive, or all these things.
And I'm going to be super controversial. And sometimes I think that we use some of these terms to kind of externally focus on what is happening.
Yep.
So it's like, oh, I can't, like my stress hormones, I have adrenal fatigue, so like there's nothing that I can do. But on the flip side of that, there are some medicinal things that can happen, that can be of use. But I think right now
I think that was significantly less controversial than you think it was.
I know, but I'm just like, I always want to make sure that I'm not being
I said a really passive thing. Oh no, I'm going to be controversial.
It's not known very well. And I think that some people use it too often. And I think some people are afraid of that term, and they can use it to some people use it to like invoke fear in people. And I don't know. So I get really kind of leery.
But that's another spot where you're almost getting to apply your things that are going wrong and issues with your health to an exterior problem instead of kind of taking ownership of it, which I think more what you want to say.
Yeah.
But I'm going to say it.
Taking ownership? Yeah, for sure.
Instead of taking ownership and saying, these are the things I can do to take control of it, it's kind of using it and saying, well, I have this, so I can't be able to do.
Yeah. And so the reason why this has kind of come into the limelight really, Nick's right, in the last 5 or 10 years, is because what we realized is when we start to like stew over a problem, our body is constantly releasing stress hormones, and specifically cortisol, where this is a stress hormone that if we're perseverating over problems, think like before we go to bed, we're just flooding our system with cortisol, and we're not really giving it an opportunity to come down. And eventually our body adapts, and it also, can have some negative consequences.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So we talked about the reason why right now with our go culture that we are experiencing some chronic stress issues. How from an evolutionary perspective, we were always supposed to have stress in a snapshot in time. But right now we have people who have kind of that 24/7 stress all the time type of lifestyle. We talked a little bit about our stress response, how we have our fast fight or flight sympathetic system, and then our slower rest and recover and digest sympathetic or parasympathetic system. We talked about the hormones. Yep. We have adrenaline, which is, that we're ready to go kind of hormone that's involved in the stress response, as well as cortisol. And we talked about how cortisol, if we are in an emotional stress response or we are always stewing over issues, can actually be always flooding our system. And we can have that circulating a lot. So why does this matter? Yeah. There's a couple things that we're going to go over is what happens when we're in kind of a chronic stress situation. But before I do that, I wanted to talk about the TED Talk that I had listened to a couple of weeks ago. Oh, actually, no, it was like probably a couple of years ago. I'm totally thinking that I saw it recently, but I haven't. And I'm totally forgetting her name. But what she talked about is the difference in health outcomes for people depending on how they perceive stress. And so they took, I believe it was Harvard professors, and they gave them a questionnaire about stress and said statements like, this stress is harmful to my health. I know that I can't sustain this amount of stress. And other statements like, stress is what pushes me, or I get more done when I have stress. And those two different types of responses showed if people perceived stress as a good thing or as a bad thing.
Yep. And I think that's more of a personal thing, because I know if it's financial stress, I shut down.
Yeah.
But if it's just in terms of amount of work stress, I can kind of crank it up.
Yep.
And I know that about me personally.
Yeah.
Not about other people.
But they weren't talking about it in like specific categories. They were just saying, you know, like the people who perceived stress as a good thing that's going to push them forward. Usually financial stress isn't one of those things for sure. They had better health outcomes and they had better like heart markers, like their cholesterol and blood pressure levels were lower and their mortality levels were lower versus the people who thought that stress was detrimental to them and all that kind of thing. So it really talks about the power of our mindset over stress and how it can actually really change these outcomes, which I think is cool. Okay. So some of the things that happen when our bodies are under large amounts of stress, our mental health suffers. Depression and anxiety can go up. As a physio, what I care about is that our pain threshold can go down. So we can think that we are in more pain when our stress levels are higher than not. And I know that that's true for Nick and I. Like when I'm stressed out, my back starts to just ache.
My everything starts to ache. So.
Well, and I noticed that with Nick too. When he's super stressed out, his body just starts to hurt from some of his football injuries.
Yeah. I'll get back, I'll get shoulder,
headaches,
my knees, and I'll get. You know what? Headaches have been pretty good recently. I haven't had too much of that. I find it more in terms of body. Past pains and things like that. I don't notice it too much in terms of my neurological stuff. I notice it more in physical.
Yeah.
Kind of manifests itself physically and not neurologically.
Yeah. The other thing that Nick had kind of mentioned earlier, we're going to come back to, is the immune system. Our immune system drops when our stress levels are really high, so we're more susceptible to getting ill. We don't recover as well from colds and flus.
Yeah, it just taxes your system, right? You're using a lot more of your body's hormones and resources towards your stress levels. So, like you said, your adrenaline is high all the time, your cortisol is high all the time, which kind of affects a lot of your gut health, and that affects your absorption, and then that affects how well your immune system works. So it's a bit of a snowball effect. But, you know, I'm not going to go into each one.
Yeah.
But essentially, your immune system will be a lot lower, and your white blood cell count will be lower when you're stressed. Yeah.
And I think about that. I remember when I was in university for my undergrad, I would get sick without fail twice a year. And it would be after my exam periods. And it would be like, you know, you're on this like adrenaline high, and then all of a sudden you're finished, you crash, and then I would just go haywire, and I would, like, pretty much around Christmas time, I would be sick every single year of my undergrad, like, without fail.
Christina worried more about school than I did, so I definitely didn't get that. But that's why she's doing a PhD.
I was going to say, I still worry about school. Okay, and then the last one is that our risk of chronic conditions goes up. So it affects the vessels around our heart and our brain.
I don't want to use the word inflammation, but it is inflammatory. You do have inflammatory markers. Yeah. Especially around, like you said, your joints, your heart, your lung. Yep. All those things can lead to an increase in cancer rate and all that stuff. And not that inflammation itself is a bad thing, but you do have cortisol levels, which will relate to a higher inflammatory marker.
Yeah. So our low-grade inflammation goes up when our cortisol levels are higher, and so that is what is thought to be potentially the mechanism behind why we're at increased risk for chronic conditions, which include stroke, heart attack, cancer, all that type of stuff when it comes to our stress level. And so, like, it's really important for our health that we're managing our stress. And so I guess that the last part of today is, what can we do about it?
I think the mindset around it's the biggest thing. How to change that, super person dependent. Yeah. I'm not going to know. But, like I said, stress can be a good indicator in terms of motivating you to get some things done.
Yeah. And so talking about, doing some self-reflection around, how you're perceiving stress, your mindset around that, maybe making some lifestyle changes. Sometimes that's not possible. It totally depends on the person and the circumstance. Doing some mindfulness and meditation work, which kind of, I always think mindset and meditation can kind of link in together. We're really busy right now, and I know that I should do mindfulness work, but I know that I don't. Or if I do it before bed, and then I pass out really fast.
Also, I don't want you to think like mindset and... So for people like me, for guys who are listening to this, they might not be as mindful and want to do the yoga and sing kumbaya. My kind of restorative part is I watch football on Sundays. I watch football on Sunday. I kind of relax. I do a little bit of work while I'm watching football, and that kind of restores me. Now, so after the Super Bowl, so I don't know what I'm going to do today, but
you just seem so macho
man. Macho man.
Oh no, it's going to turn into a karaoke podcast. And so for what is going to allow you to relax and restore, even if it's short periods of time, for Nick, it's watching football. For me, it's going and reading or doing something like quiet journaling, that kind of thing. So it is really person dependent. Exercise is also going to be a huge help, but not necessarily going like guns a-blazing out, because super high intensity exercise can be really taxing on the system as well in a good way. But when you're at high stress and you add high intensity exercise, sometimes that can be this perfect storm for injuries. Mm-hmm. And I've done that before where I'm super stressed out. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to work out, and I go too hard. My body isn't ready for it. I shouldn't be doing it. And all of a sudden I'm hurt the next day, or an old injury is aching me the next day. And I kick myself every single time because I know that's what happened. But, And then the last one is trying to acknowledge that. Like, sometimes we try to ignore things that are bugging us. And for me, acknowledging where my stress is and acknowledging, if it's a short-term thing, if it's a long-term thing, kind of talking through that. If I talk through it with Nick, or I talk through it with a friend of mine, or I just write about it, it helps me a lot because I tend to kind of see where my mind's at and how I'm doing. And that's kind of a good check-in.
Yep.
Yeah. Do you have any other things that you do for stress?
I used to shoot guns, but you don't like that.
Okay, guns terrify me. I don't know why. If there's anyone listening that that actually owns guns and stuff like that, they're going to think that I'm such a baby, but it's true.
When I lived in Thunder Bay, we had a shooting range in our backyard, so I used to like to do that. But no, there's things I like to do on the weekend. Like in the summer, I like to go fishing. I try to go ice fishing a couple times here, but it's too freaking cold. Things you enjoy and things you kind of get that quiet time to yourself. And you also have to think about who you are, right? Christina's more extroverted than I am, so she wants to be around people to get that energy. Where sometimes on Sunday, I need to be by myself for a little bit. So I think knowing yourself, writing down when you actually feel energized and what really kind of helps you get up and get going, I think is more important than, my friend does this, so I should do that.
Yep. And some of that self-care stuff too, it doesn't come at a cost to whatever is causing you stress. Like, I know that I could be doing business stuff and PhD stuff all the time. And there's times where I have to be like, I'm going to be a little bit later than I wanted to be with this, or this I'm just going to have to say no to. And that's okay sometimes, because it's about longevity. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And if we're always not taking care of ourselves, eventually our body's going to break down in some way or another. All right. I think that's it for today.
Sounds pretty good.
Yeah, I liked that. Yeah. I'm sure we'll do another episode on stress and kind of break down a little bit more of the management of the nuances. So listen for that. Nick actually did an article about stress and food. Was it nutrition? Stressed Out, that article that you did a couple of weeks ago?
Yes,
it was around nutrition. Right. So we'll link to that in the show notes. If you haven't yet, please subscribe to us on iTunes. Give us a 5-star review. We would really appreciate it. And if you know anyone else who might be interested in the podcast, please pass it along. All the show notes will be at staveoff.ca/podcast. And Yeah, I guess we'll see you next week.
See you next week.
Yeah, it's always a question mark if Nick's going to be with me, but trust me, I'm going to be here. All right. Have a great week, everyone. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Stave Off podcast. Go to staveoff.ca to check out the show notes and more helpful content and how you can lead a long and happy life. This podcast is brought to you in partnership with the Senior Rehab Project at seniorrehabproject.com.